I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Glass. He's an associate professor in epidemiology at the School of Public Health. He got his PhD at Duke University. He did his postdoc at Yale, and subsequently he taught at Yale, Harvard, before joining Hopkins. And I've known Dr. Glass for 2 months now, and he's really getting up to speed on ASR rather quickly. And he'll tell us all about the innovations he's been bringing to the field of public health.
Thank you. Actually, I have a gift for you, Zach. The reason I'm here is that I had a need and a problem to solve, and discovered in the middle of writing a grant that the world's premier center for speech and language processing was right in my own backyard. I was embarrassed by how long it took me to find that out. But I did at the last minute, and Zach was willing to step forward and help me work on this grant. And I was delighted to receive a warm reception from both he and Professor Jelinek and several other people at the center who stepped into the fire and helped me write a grant. And so I'm going to present to you your own copy of the grant, which actually did go in, and hopefully will get funded. So delighted to be here. Thanks for the invitation. This is a tricky talk to think about. There's a danger that I'm going to say things to you that you're not interested in, or perhaps worse, things that you already know at a much deeper level than I do. So I'm going to try to avoid both those problems and instead carry on in my effort to bridge the world of what's going on in your center with what's going on in my world in the field of public health and epidemiology. It's my overarching thesis that if these two worlds were to come together, that we could make beautiful music together, to use a, I guess, strained metaphor, and that there's a tremendous need for what you do in the areas that I do research, and that unfortunately many of my colleagues don't even recognize that need yet, and hopefully that will change. So I'm hoping that this will be the first of many discussions, dialogues, etc. And it's been fun to talk to people at the center here today already. I'm going to do 4 things in my talk. 1, I'm going to tell you about the problem that I have, that I came here to help get a solution to. Number 2, I'm going to tell you about a study that give you a flavor of the kind of work that I do. The work that we're going to move forward with at this point is an outgrowth of the work done in the Baltimore Memory Study, right here, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. And then I want to tell you something, condensed down obviously from the 25 pages that went to NIH, about what our collaboration produced in this grant, and finally talk a little bit about the future and what it might mean to bring these worlds together. In the field of aging within public health, which is my main disciplinary home, the main thing that we study, or holy grail if you will, is the elusive and somewhat complicated and troubled variable called functional disability. And at one level we can think about human functioning as a complex configuration of behaviors in many different dimensions. This is the one within my field that has the greatest importance and the greatest significance. The term functioning has become almost synonymous with the notion of functional disability, and this is the model, the sort of conceptual scheme that motivates this way of thinking. I just point your eye to this middle box here, disability, which is defined in the WHO classification as any restriction or lack of ability to perform an activity in the manner or range considered normal. Now, how's that for precision? We can see how easily it would be to get right to an operational definition and a measurement strategy that would allow us to really pin this down. Well, as it turns out, that's quite complicated. And in fact, the overall theme of my talk is that in trying to get a handle on this, the idea of measuring people's functioning in real-life settings has remained elusive for 50 years, and it's a problem that we need to fundamentally fix. And I am interested in trying out a new strategy with the help of colleagues at, here at the center to try to do that. So I'll give you the very, very short history of this. In 1959, a physician by the name of Mahoney was working in a hospital in Maryland and was trying to figure out which of the patients, older patients in his hospital was going to die. If I'm in the way, please let me know, as you just did. Who was going to die, who was going to get better, kind of a prediction model. And on the basis of that, in 1959, developed something called the Activities of Daily Living Index, something that probably none of you have ever heard of, but there you have it. And initially designed, as I say, as a clinician-rated instrument in order to predict mortality, recovery, etc. among sick, old people in hospitals. Now, this basic kind of ADL scheme, Activities of Daily Living, I accuse somebody else of using mysterious acronyms. That's our acronym, ADL. It's basically shown over here. So the basic activities of daily living involve the ability to walk across a room, the ability to get dressed, to eat your food, to use the toilet, shower and bath, personal grooming, transferring from chair to bed. We believe if you can do these things, you can live by yourself. You can live independently in the community. The question is, how do we measure that? How do we find out who can do these things and who can't? Now, this variable has tremendous significance from a public policy and public health point of view. We use it to, as I say, as the initial work by Mahoney and then later other people did, to predict who was going to die, who was going to live. We still use it for that. But now we use it to determine who's eligible and who should be in a nursing home. So if your relative has a stroke, for example, and loses the ability to do this, the decision about whether he or she can go home and live in their home, as undoubtedly they will want to do, versus be transferred to a nursing home, will be largely based on the answers to these questions, whether or not there are X or more ADL limitations. And how do we assess that? I'll show you in a second. Capacity to live independently, we judge the effectiveness of treatments based on these numbers, illness recovery, program eligibility. Billions and billions of Medicare dollars go one direction or another in the United States based on this single instrument. So how do we measure it? Here's the state of the art. Remember, grandma's going to a nursing home is hanging in the balance now. We ask her a series of 8 questions that look like this. This is one way, the CATS ADL. Are you able to walk across a room without assistance? Yes or no? Yes.
Are these questions modified for someone in a wheelchair, for example?
No, in fact, they're standardized with the idea that you can actually, you asked a more subtle question than I initially assumed, so let me give you 2 parts. Number one, we want to standardize these questions so that the answers we get can be compared across populations and we can formulate policy, public policy. So when the Medicare policy group decides who's going to go to a nursing home, they don't want 19 different versions of these questions adapted to different environments. People who may have a spouse living with them, people who may have had home modifications. They want one simple set of questions. This is what we've got. Now the question about the use of compensatory devices is an important one. Ultimately, what we want to know is, can people do these things? If they need help from compensatory technologies, we ought to give them credit for it. Some of these instruments are worded in such a way that that's taken into account and others are not. Another instrument, are you able to walk up and down stairs to the 2nd floor without help? Now, are you able? Now think about this for yourself. If you had broken your leg or you had had a devastating stroke or you happen to be 90 years old. This requires someone to do a very complex mental calculus. Am I able? Could I, in the abstract, could I hypothetically do this? Well, our answer would inevitably be, well, it sort of depends. Although all of the depends is removed from this framework. Naji, how much difficulty do you have pulling or pushing large objects like a living room chair? Well, these questions obviously give rise to a tremendous amount of squishiness. But this is the framework, invented in 1959, used in 2005 to determine who goes to a nursing home, to determine where Medicaid dollars are, to determine the overall disability burden at a population level. We're still there. We haven't budged.
So let me repeat a point that you probably made. So when the question says, are you able to walk across the room without assistance? So it is actually being left vague, and the patient has to analyze whether assistance could include a walking stick.
That's correct.
And they just have to answer yes or no.
That's right. And it turns out if you do an experiment where you randomize people and ask them questions that are slightly different wording, you get disability estimate rates that vary wildly depending on what wording you use. So you put in questions about to clarify parts, to offer special circumstances, to allow or disallow the use of canes, walkers, etc., wildly different estimates. Among the other measurement problems we have here are recall error. People can't remember how many stairs they went up. Memory and cognitive impairment. Remember, these are older people. Some of them have lost their ability to do this complex mental algorithm. Denial and its neurologic cousin, anosognosia. There are plenty of conditions in late life that where one of the critical features is the loss of the ability to monitor one's capacities and abilities. This gets in our way. When we ask clinicians, patients themselves, and caregivers about someone's ability to do something, they vary wildly. They vary wildly. Question wording, as we said, compensatory devices, placebo effects. You want to know whether rehab works. So at the end of rehab, you get one group that has had rehab, another group that hasn't. You say, are you able to do X, Y, and Z? Well, how do we know that the answers that we get reflect the results of the rehab treatment or the fact that individuals' expectations have been changed or something soft and squishy unrelated to their real ability to actually do these things? We also can't really study higher order complex behaviors. Social interactions, work, all the things that most of us would say are really important. Old age is not just about being able to walk across the room and use the potty by yourself, and yet our focus primarily has been on those rudimentary tasks, primarily because they are presumably easier and less complex from a measurement standpoint. There are other problems, but that's just a list. So, 50 years after the ADLs were written, here's a summary of the state of measurement by McDowell and Newell, who wrote a book called Measuring Health, which is a kind of Bible in our field. And they say, look, this field is in its infancy. The psychometric properties of these ADL scales are rotten, and we have made very little progress, and a great deal of information is missed. And the way we classify people is undoubtedly problematic. So a couple of different approaches have been tried to deal with these measurement problems. I won't talk about that one. Physical performance testing. So let's take out self-reports and let's put, instead of asking people, are you able to dress, let's put them in a laboratory setting, give them a shirt, a standardized shirt that everybody wears, and we time them to see how long it takes them to put the buttons on. Or we time them to see how long they walk across a room 10 feet back and forth. Physical performance testing. Problem is, solves one problem, doesn't solve another. What someone is able to do in the abstract, in the context of an office or a clinic, tells us nothing about what they do really at home. And that's ultimately what we're interested in. So it's not a perfect answer. Direct assessment methods have been tried, things like activity diaries where a beeper goes off and someone has to write down what they're doing at that moment. as a way of dealing with recall. Turns out that diary methods still have many of the same kinds of problems. And at least for physical function, we've made a major step forward by putting accelerometers on people, or this is a kind of primitive sensor, motion detection sensor, which can be used to figure out physical function. But for anything more interesting and sexy, like social interaction or cognitive function, we really have no equivalent to the accelerometer. We have no way of measuring with any degree of precision beyond just asking people these sort of questions, what they're able to do. So a few years ago, I wrote a paper called Conjugating the Tenses of Function, in which I tried to point out that not only do we have these measurement problems, but there's another problem too, and that is that we can think about, this is sort of this sort of linguistic device of conjugation across terms of function. So we have the hypothetical tense, which is what people can do under a kind of hypothetical, imagined, context-free sort of way. That's all the stuff that we measure now, all of the are you able questions, the CATs and the other ones I've mentioned. Then we have these physical performance measures that I just talked about, and I call that the experimental tense. What could you do under controlled conditions? This has some advantages, the control and precision that occurs there, but neither of these things tell us what someone actually does in their home setting, and that ultimately is something that is of critical importance. How do people function in their natural environments? And that's what I call the do-do problem. So we have almost no way of assessing what people actually do. And this is actually the departure point for the work that we did in this grant. One of the things, why this is not just a simple linguistic sort of distinction and why it sort of makes a difference is sort of depicted here. If you imagine cross-classifying enacted tense. So these are people who don't actually do a given task. These people do, versus the hypothetical tense, people who say they're able to do a task, yes and no. Those who are on the diagonal are obviously concordant and they make sense, and if everybody were that way, all you'd have to do is measure things once. But in fact, I'd argue that it's really these off-diagonal cells that are the most interesting. Those who say, well, I have trouble doing that, I have difficulty doing that, or I'm not able to do it, but they actually do it anyway. Those are the overachievers. And understanding who those people are and why they're able to do despite having difficulty is of critical importance. And likewise, we've got people who say, yeah, I have no difficulty, but I don't ever do the thing. I don't actually ever do that. And these are sort of the underachievers. And figuring out what is going on there is potentially of great importance as well.
So you could change, the terminology is a little bit loaded. You could change it around by saying that the underachievers are actually boasters.
They're what?
They're braggarts. They claim they can do more than they can, whereas the overachievers are actually modest.
Yes, you could argue
the
that.
The question is whether you think that, whether your perspective comes from what they can do, whether you're reading across the rows or reading down the columns.
Right. In the absence of, however, measuring the do-do, we have no alternative but to treat everyone as if they're here, even though we know that that's unrealistic. Yes?
Are the diagonal boxes interchanged?
Yes.
Why is the low category called high functioning?
Upper left and lower right seem to be backwards.
Are these backwards? Are one set backwards?
I'm the diagonal boxes, like say type 1, they're like low and low, right? Why they've been called high functioning?
Yeah, these are both reversed. I apologize. I didn't notice that. Yeah, the high functioning group obviously should be high. Academic dyslexia strikes again. So anyway, there are data to show that this is not just, that this is a problem. So if you look at studies where you actually ask the question two different ways, and this is a well-known aging study, are you able to do heavy housework? Among those who say, no, I'm not able, among 60% of that group who are high functioning, I won't bore you with the definition of that, say they do it anyway. And more than a third of those who say they're not able actually later report that they actually do it. So, and we can see these kinds of significant off-diagonal patterns in lots of different data sets. And some people would call this just measurement error, and it to some extent very much is, but I think it gets to a more important conceptual distinction, which is we must recognize that people's functioning in their home environments, what they actually do, might be quite different than what they say, how they report in terms of difficulty and ability, capacity within some sort of hypothetical sense. Now, we can argue about which one is more important or valid, but in either case, self-reports do exact a fairly significant toll on the accuracy of the science that we do and the policy that we create. So just to summarize this part of it, functional status assessment is critically important in public health. We have an over-reliance on retrospective self-reports. Severe measurement problems are known to exist. We've done very little differently and have developed no new approaches in the last 50 years. And we've got lack of attention to some very important issues that just don't sort of appear on the radar screen. We have a very difficult time understanding and measuring complex behaviors. We don't know what people actually do. We can't look at environmental factors, and we have completely ignored language. Now there I've used the L word, so hopefully in the context of this, I'll be starting to build a case for why language matters, for those of you who are now wondering. Okay, first let me tell you a little bit about a study that I work on, something called the Baltimore Neighborhood Study, funded by the NIH. It's a large RO1. That's not a terminology that probably means anything to anybody in this room, but the idea here is to try to disentangle the complex web of causes of cognitive decline. So older adults differ in the extent to which they decline cognitively, and we don't really know very much about what causes some people to decline a little versus a lot versus none. And so we're going to try to, in a comprehensive way, study a whole range of factors, including environmental exposures like lead, behaviors, vascular health, genetics, looking at multiple genes, conditions in neighborhoods, and stress to try to get at this. It's the core aims of this study. Now what we did is created a study area of 75 neighborhoods in Baltimore, and we recruited 1,140 subjects that we followed over 5 years with 3 study visits. And at each study visit, we measure their functioning, physical function, social, and cognitive, with the standard self-reported measures. In the context of doing this, we have been very worried about the fact that what we're measuring, particularly for social and physical behaviors, functioning, are all based on self-report. Now we have these standardized neuropsych tests for cognitive function, but again, we don't know much about how people are performing in their daily lives. So this is sort of the overall structure of this. This is a population-based, what we call cohort study, of adults 50 to 70 years old, randomly selected in Baltimore. And there are 1,000 people. We've collected a whole bunch of stuff on them. Let me just give you a sense of the kind of thing that we're doing with these data, because it's relevant for the grant. We want to know what are the environmental determinants of some of the risk factors for cognitive decline, one of which is obesity. So this is one of the sub-studies we did, where we wanted to know, does living in a rotten neighborhood contribute to obesity? Do people in bad neighborhoods, there's a theory about environmental stress. If you put any animal under environmental stress, they'll be hungrier and they'll eat more. Pick up a rat by its tail numerous times during the day, you'll see that the rat will eat more calories. You take a group of college students and you sleep deprive them, and this is a great study. You take college students, sit them around a table, give them a good night's sleep, and put snacks in front of them. The snacks are ordered or sequenced in terms of from nutritious to junk food, low sugar, high sugar. And you tape record them and watch what snacks they pick. Then you put them, same group of people, you put them in a sleep lab, keep them up, and give them no more than 3 hours of sleep. And then repeat the exercise. And they all go for the sugar. Biologically, it makes perfect sense. Mammals, in the context of environmental stress, have built-in triggers that lead to increased calorie intake. The reason is very simple. Environmental stress means it's time to leave. It's time to go somewhere else. And travel means more calories. So we're biologically wired this way. So we want to know if living in a rotten neighborhood in Baltimore led to increased risk of obesity, controlling on or taking account of all the individual level characteristics like diet and exercise and all that stuff, education that's associated with obesity. And this slide doesn't sort of show up real clearly here, but we made an index of how hazardous your neighborhood is. And that's the colored surfaces here. And the vertical height is the percentage of people who are obese. Now, just to give you an example, we've got many neighborhoods like Oliver, which have over 50% of the adults are obese. The obesity epidemic is another topic, and I won't go into it, but if you could think about 60% of the adults being obese, that's extremely high. Very high neighborhood stress levels. Roland Park, 15% obese, 15% obese, very low neighborhood hazard score. Now that doesn't tell us much, right? We still haven't taken into account, maybe the people in Roland Park are just eating healthier food, maybe it has nothing to do with this neighborhood stress. So we did a series of complicated models to try to tease that out, and it turns out that those in the worst, most stressful neighborhoods have a 70% increased risk of obesity, controlling on all that stuff, relative to those in the least hazardous neighborhoods, which is the strongest evidence found so far of the effect of neighborhood stress conditions on obesity. So that gives you a feeling for the kind of stuff we're doing. Now let me change topics again and talk about this grant that we wrote. The context here again is that we have 50-year-old ways of measuring functioning. We need something better. And we have an ongoing cohort study that we can use to test new instrument approaches. So that's how the two things fit together. NIH came out with a grant announcement saying we want to fund research to develop new ways of measuring things. And we're going to fund that kind of research. So I got that RFA and I said, aha, this is my chance. I've been working on this issue for 5 years now. Finally found a grant mechanism that would work. So set off in search of a homunculus, a little seeing eye that would sit on the shoulder of individuals and record, gather data, analyze and gather data on their actual functioning in their home environments outside the laboratory in the social, cognitive, and physical domains. The goal was to have something passive, so no subject reporting or input was required. You stick it on them and send them out into the world. Wearable, it had to minimize interruption and influence, so it had to be something that would be easy to incorporate into their lives. Valid, real-time, multidimensional data collection and analysis. And this was sort of the goal, is to develop some kind of personal monitoring device that would do all these things, that would combine accelerometry, ambient noise, data collection, and anything else you wanted to sense. Now, this turned out to be a pretty challenging enterprise because no one had done it, and because the people doing the technical parts that were needed were all in sort of disparate research communities. So as I said, I didn't know about the center. None of my public health colleagues knew about the center. If I raised the subject of voice recognition to public health colleagues, people would say, oh, well, there's via voice. Or the sort of standard, dragon speak or whatever. And no one felt that any of that stuff was ready to go as an approach to solve the problem that we have as researchers, which is how do we record and analyze real-time natural speech behavior in social context, without having to train for each person and so forth and so on. So we have our group working on epidemiologic studies, looking at populations with a need to measure things better. I found at MIT a whole group of people doing sensor-based health assessment, and also ubiquitous computing, wearable computing. It turns out all this stuff was going on at the MIT Media Lab that I didn't know about, no one else apparently knew about either, beyond that community, and that they were doing amazing things by bundling together this super miniaturized hardware and sensing capability to actually measure a lot of the things I was interested in. And the final piece of the puzzle was ASR, and because of the need to collect and analyze massive amounts of speech data, there was no way I was going to pay a graduate student to manually transcribe all this stuff. And so this was the sort of final frontier of figuring out how to make this all work. So we wrote a grant. It has 4 aims. Number 1, to develop a prototype device. That'll be done at MIT in the Media Lab. They're going to build us a gizmo. And it's going to be a cell phone that hangs on the belt with a pendant microphone attached to the lapel, something that looks like jewelry, apparently. Bluetooth connection between the 2 devices. The cell phone will gather 3-axis accelerometry data and will track people's movements through the environment. So we can tell where they go, how long they spend time there. And that's critically important in a way that I'll explain in a minute. Aim 2 is to then say, okay, well, we're going to record people's speech, but we got to know what to do with it. So Zach and perhaps other colleagues here who choose to work on this, I know at least one student will be, is going to develop the first ASR system for speaker-independent system for older adults using the hardware that will be built into this device, so that we'll have a custom-made ASR system designed to do what we need. Aim 3 is to sort of pilot test this in a group of subjects from the Baltimore Memory Study who will wear this thing around for a week or 2 weeks. Out of that will come a set of independent measures of physical, cognitive, and social functioning. Aim 4 is to develop statistical models for dealing with all this data. And Aim 5 is to look at correlates of environmental circumstances with patterns of functioning observed at the individual level. So we want to know, for example, if the number of sidewalks in your neighborhood affects how much walking you do. We want to know if the gender ratio of males to females in your neighborhood affects how many communications or conversations that you have. Things along those lines. All right, so this is an interesting partnership, and figuring out how to get everybody to talk the same language has been fun and challenging. We've got the Human Dynamics Group at MIT, Epidemiology, and now the Center for Speech and Language Processing. And sort of getting those groups to work on this first project has been very valuable and useful. Collaboration across such different kind of scientific communities, though, is a challenge, and it's been an interesting one, and one that will continue, I think, to unfold. Here's the LIFEmeter is what we're calling it so far. I don't know if that's really a good name, but that's what we're calling it. Again, it's this pendant microphone, a cell phone that mounts on the belt. It actually works as a cell phone. It can be used to communicate with participants, find out what they think about what's going on, remind them of the need to turn it on if it's not turned on, etc. It gathers these kinds of data, location, the automatic location information system. It turns out that Congress passed a law that says every cell phone has to know where it is within 100 feet. So everybody who's got a cell phone already has, built onto that cell phone, the ability of someone to find where you are or where the cell phone is. Many people don't know that their cell phone can do that, and cell phones can be told not to do that, but all cell phones are required to be able to do that. as a result of something called the E911 law. We're collecting digital audio sampling. We get directional signal from the speaker here at this pendant mic, and then there's a second mic built into the cell phone, which is omnidirectional, is capturing ambient sounds, and hopefully with which we can use that information to detect conversation as it happens. This accelerometry data gives us all kinds of information about motion and movement. So what will it measure? I'll just go through this briefly because I know we finished at 5:30, but I should wrap up in the next 5 minutes, I suppose. So physical function, we're going to try to estimate kilocalorie energy expenditure. Postural change every time someone gets up, sits down. Change in orientation, lies down. If you're a couch potato, we're going to find out about you. This is going to actually tell us the percentage of your waking time you spent in a supine state. So the couch potatoes will no longer be able to prevent detection. Walking speed, on average in a peak, stair climbing, number of steps you've taken. This is just a partial list. Something I'm kind of psyched about is life space diameter. So we can tell the distance that you travel from your home, and we can construct a polygon of the area around your home, at least within the context of the Baltimore environment, that you've inhabited in a given space of time. And I'll show you a picture of what this looks like. It's so we can figure out how far people travel, where they go, etc. As far as social functioning goes, social engagement, time spent in conversation, number of distinct conversations. Again, this is stuff that you know more about than I, but this is sort of the goal we're aiming at, and I'm trying to understand better the ways in which you folks approach these things. Social support has been a major topic of interest in public health. Again, all we do is rely on these questions like, how often does someone say they love you? I mean, that's a typical question in these instruments. It turns out men don't get or need social support. So it's really funny to administer a social support instrument to a man who's just had a stroke, which is what I did my dissertation on, in a hospital, and you ask him, so when was the last time how often does someone cook for you or tell you that they love you? And the man is saying, never, don't need that. That makes no sense. And the wife is, of course, sitting right there and proceeds to set the record straight. And so these questions have a tremendous amount of problems with them. So what I'm interested in is recording the language and decoding the use of, or frequency and use of, whatever it is we think we are prepared to label as supportive conversational exchanges. This is a measure of conversational stress by combining information on signal energy, formant frequency, and spectral entropy. A measure developed by Alex Pentland that he's shown to be predictive of a variety of behavioral outcomes. The kind of thing that would, I think, take the world of behavioral assessment in public health light years forward relative to what we've been doing for the last several decades. So here are some examples. Finally, cognitive function. We were talking about Shannon, information theory, and I had an opportunity to go back and read the original paper by Shannon that launched the whole information theory revolution, and sort of discovered in there the idea of this sort of diversity index, and would love to try to measure that or concepts like it in terms of understanding cognitive function in real life settings. But the run-of-the-mill stuff like speaking rate, word production per minute, disfluencies, the frequency of insight words. Psychologists have developed categories of words that can be used to try to get at various kinds of parameters of cognitive function. So this is what we envision being able to do with this device. In terms of modeling it, there are a lot of challenges and complexities. One of them is that we've tried to sort of set up this complex sort of state space matrix. So at one level, the device is collecting data on whether or not it's on or off or resting. And then within the context of awake time, when the machine is on and the subject is awake, we can imagine travel time, speech time, and motion time. So where, for example, motion time would be resting, no motion, low intensity motion, or high intensity motion, and where our biostat colleagues are going to develop complicated Markov-like models to try to understand the determinants of the transition probabilities associated with moving across these different transitions, taking into account the totality of different modalities of state transitions. So this is a complicated undertaking. The chairman of biostatistics has agreed to work with us. I've enticed him into thinking that this is an interesting problem, and so I'm looking forward to that collaboration as well. This is an example of one of these time-space aquariums developed by a geographer at the University of Ohio. You can't, I'm sorry, Ohio State. Can't see this very well, but this is a picture which shows the city of Portland, and they've tracked people through the city, and their spatial movements are depicted along this plane, and the amount of time spent at any one location in this plane. And this allows you to generate three-dimensional representations of where people go and how they spend their time. Now, again, going back to the question of, say, sidewalks and physical activity, this gives us a metric, a method of looking for the effective environments on functioning in a way that's never been possible before, and I'm excited about that. Just some potential applications of this kind of thing. Again, going back to the policy issue, you want to know whether someone can function independently, you want to know if they do all of these activities. We'll put this device on them, send them home, and then figure out whether they actually do them, as opposed to just asking them, are you able? I mean, if we're going to make decisions involving billions of dollars, involving people's quality of life, let's do it with better measurement. We enroll patients in a clinical trial. We want to know if one drug reduces pain or symptoms or help seeking. Let's figure out a device that will allow to collect those kind of behavioral data without the use of self-reports. We've got cognitively impaired patients. We want to figure out, we want to prevent wandering in them and evaluate their safety in the home. A device like this could work quite well. Chronically ill patients, you know, you have a cell phone. You want to measure, you want to ensure you can monitor blood pressure, respiration, blood sugar, anything you want with a device like this. There's no reason why you couldn't build this kind of system around a chronic disease management program that could potentially be quite low in cost. For general population issues, I'm going back to obesity here, we want to know about the effect of the food environment on calorie intake. Well, you have a device that measures where people go. You link that to where you know the fast food is, and you can use that to compare activity levels versus caloric intake and try to get a handle on what's going on with respect to obesity. Okay, obviously a lot of future challenges. You know, privacy, I just want to mention this one. Everybody keeps saying, are people going to tolerate this? Are they going to like the homunculus on their shoulder? Are they going to be willing to have us record everything that they say? And I don't know the answer to that yet, but this is why I think what is happening here is so critically important. If I go to you and say, I'm going to stick a microphone on you and record everything you say, and then I'm going to have an army of graduate student monkeys in the back. Actually, that's probably a bad choice of terms, isn't it? Just the monkeys and typewriter kind of idea intruded upon me. Anyway, we're going to have a group of graduate students diligently working to transcribe these things, and they're going to listen to what you said and write it down on paper. Your willingness to be in this study and to have this device on is probably going to be severely hampered. If, on the other hand, I say, I am going to record everything you say, or this machine will, but no human being is going to listen to it. Instead, the model that Zach Shafran developed is going to transcribe that, and then the data will be analyzed for recognizing structures and patterns, which will then be abstracted externally. And so if you commit a crime, if you yell at your wife, if you do anything that you don't want anybody to know about, no one's going to know about it, because those aren't the things that we're measuring. Then the chances that we're going to get people to accept this and allow it to become part of routine research is significantly enhanced. And I want to be able to tell people that no person is going to listen to what they say, and that this automated speech recognition system will be a vehicle for protecting privacy. I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are on that. Yes?
Two questions about that. One is that for the sake of research, humans probably will be listening to stuff. And in other words, what you collect from the initial subjects while developing the system, probably you don't want to hardwire the analysis. You want to be able to get the entire recording so that you can play with it.
Absolutely. And so we have...
And the other half of the question is, how about what... If you collect all the data, or if you only collect some statistical summary, in each case, is there consent needed from the people who they're talking to?
That's a question we're going to have to wrestle with the local IRB, whether I need consent with the person they're talking to. The answer, I hope, will be no. And the reason is we have pretty high resolution audio signal coming from the participant who has given us informed consent. What we have from those around that person, presumably, is enough information to tell whether someone is talking, whether someone else is talking or not, and very little else about the content or nature of what they are saying. So we essentially have unilateral detail with sort of bilateral color commentary, if you will. We have minimum information about others with whom someone is speaking, which we hope will be a basis for making the argument that we do not need informed consent from those around the individual, which would make it unfeasible. And of course, for those involved in phase one of the data collection, which I didn't go into, obviously there we're going to be developing a training corpus, and we're going to get 5 to 15-minute speech segments on 500 people that will turn over to Zach, and that will obviously be transcribed, and people, so there'll be a separate consent process for that. We're hoping to find a natural sort of real-life chat context where people will feel safe, and where it'll be unlikely that people will be dissuaded from participating because of that concern. But the idea is to invest there in the development of this model, which would allow us then in subsequent research, when we put this device on people for a week, we want to collect a week's worth of their conversation, that at that point we'll be able to assure them that they'll be not listened to by another person.
Right. I mean, I did have a question which is somewhat similar. It seems like an interesting summary statistic, even if you weren't able to discern the words that the other people were saying, would be some sort of speaker identification for the other people they talk to. So if you're measuring social diversity, the number of different people you talk to in the course of the day might be extractable from data that's not quite good enough to do transcriptions.
That's the plan.
Oh, okay, so you're...
Yeah, that's the plan.
If you're trying to collect naturalistic data, which can be read by humans for research purposes, I guess if there's a question of informed consent by the other people, you could automatically mask out the other speakers, do high-pass filtering or whatever, plus speaker ID. Low-pass filtering.
My hope is to put the speaker identification algorithms on the device, so that what I get out of the device is a count, is summary information about the presence of other speakers or other ambient noises that might be of interest. Televisions, phone rings, gunshots, whatever it is I might be interested in. But the actual recording of the auditory data, audio data, simply doesn't come home with the machine.
There's some prior work that you might want to look at. It was not as sophisticated as what you guys are talking about. I think the investigator's name is Pennebaker, and it's somewhere in Texas.
Yes. In fact, Jamie Pennebaker and I had a conversation at a NATO bioterrorism meeting about this 5 years ago, and hatched much of this work together. He has gone off to develop something called the EAR, or the enriched something. He has a device that he has developed. That device is, and he has developed his language inquiry system. And there's some collaboration that's going to occur. It turns out he was away and not able to collaborate on this in this particular context. But I'm familiar with that work, and what we're doing is, I think, significantly more advanced in several respects than what he's doing, although his collaborations with linguists has been, I think, also very productive, and probably that's an area where he's doing more stuff than we're able to do. But yes?
I'm just curious how you would, are you planning to distinguish between if another person is heard, is it somebody on the radio or somebody on TV? Or you were mentioning gunshots, in fact. So how would you be able to distinguish, say, somebody maybe is watching a TV program or maybe a movie, which has that kind of effect on it?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. When I asked Zach about this, do you remember what your answer was? Because I'm afraid I will misquote you if.
There are, in standard broadcast newscasts, there are some types of noises that are distinguished. So if we similarly have a collection of typical noises that we get, we train on them.
Yeah, I guess the issue that comes up is, like, to build something like that, you would have to listen to some of that stuff. So I guess we can go back to the design of your first experiment with the Baltimore memory study. Even before you put these devices on these people, what we would need to be able to do some of this automatic filtering out of things you're not allowed to record. We'd have to, for example, let somebody in the media lab in MIT wear this around for a few weeks, where he does have consent from all the people that he or she talks to. And then actually get an assessment of this. Like, can we distinguish between when they're watching TV and when they're actually talking to someone?
Yeah, there are 3 phases in data collection: the ASR training database group, and then I mentioned the 3rd phase, which is this group that is going to use the device as it's going to be deployed, full of. Now, there's a middle phase, which is sort of the validation phase. So there, we do things like, for example, we're going to test the accelerometer. So we get a volunteer to walk up a certain specified number of steps, to engage in ballet-like physical movements that are choreographed and standardized, et cetera, and figure out if the machine gives us the right answer. The language stuff, there are plenty of analogs where we're going to do the exact same thing, but on a very narrow group of people, probably the MIT graduate student who we're employing up there to do this. So there'll be a fair amount, they have a fair amount of experience sort of testing and validating stuff along those lines. Now, you know, there's a great deal here. This is the trick here, because that's a great question. Can we really tell the difference between TV dialogue and human speech based on the data we're going to get? And I don't know the answer to that. So if the study section says, well, we're not going to fund you because of that problem, that's a fatal flaw, I can't give you the answer. In part because no one possesses the knowledge base to be able to answer all of the questions that arise. That's why this is a really exciting and interesting project, because it really is, you know, different scientific and technical communities coming together and working together on a problem. And that, in my experience, doing that in a real way is actually quite rare and quite important. So we're gonna do those kinds of tests to figure it out, and whether there's something in the signal from the recording equipment that will allow us to differentiate TV from speech or not is something we'll have to experiment with.
Well, there are a number of cues that might help other than just the audio cues.
Right.
So it might be that you could pick up electromagnetic emissions or something and tell that there's a TV on in the vicinity. I don't know. I'm not an electrical engineer, but half the people in this room are. It's also the case that for broadcast media, in principle, you could just do matching against everything that was being broadcast at that time and filter it out thereby. And finally, people who are watching TV probably watch it under particular circumstances. They're always sitting on their couch. The TV is roughly at a particular volume. It's in stereo, and the speakers come from a particular angle and so forth. And all of that might give you some kind of phase signature.
The sort of spectral consistency of broadcast audio, I think, will be the giveaway. So in conversation, it's very rare that the signal intensity coming in real conversation, as well as movement patterns of participants and so forth, is so incredibly constant. Whether or not that's exploitable in this context is something I don't know. One of the things that's fun about the sensor group at Media Lab is that if I say to them, gee, somebody mentioned at Hopkins that we need to get an electrical engineer to stick some kind of sensor on the device to pick up the emissions from a TV, he'll get on the phone and say, oh, we can do that, that's easy. And so the technology has developed to the point where the sort of modular aggregations of differing sensor technologies within, and the standardization of communication protocols between these sensing devices has just gone so rapidly. I've been in touch with people at Intel who are developing this ubiquitous computing platform where they mount little mini computers they call motes all over someone's house, and they gather this tremendous amount of data. And they've developed, this stuff has just exploded to the point where every time I ask a question, can this be done? The answer now, as opposed to even 5 years ago, is sure, lots of different ways, we'll work it out. So I'm very encouraged that these technical problems really just require a group of people to get together and think them through.
Let me ask you one more question.
Sure.
This has to do with what you're really looking for when all is said and done. So let's say you want to think about something like cognitive function. And when you bring them in the lab, you say, okay, count backwards from 100, skipping 3 numbers or something. And so that's a specific task, and you know what you're looking for, and you know if they can do this, they have a certain proficiency, and if not, they don't have some ability. In real life, what are we looking for?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm tempted to give you 2 different answers. With respect to cognitive function, the process of standardizing the cognitive function testing that is widely and ubiquitously used has the consequence that all of the tasks that one is required to perform in cognitive testing, including the serial 7's task, there's some exceptions, who's been president, that kind of stuff. But all of these tasks require you to do things that you would never in your routine life be required to do. Nobody has to count backwards by 7. It's not a functional task. That's not something one needs to do in order to be a successful member of the community. We have to have it that way because if we had routine tasks, then we wouldn't be able to figure out whether someone who could do something was really doing it, applying knowledge to a novel circumstance. So the whole paradigm of cognitive testing is based on this idea of having people do freakish and weird tasks that no one else would actually have to be able to do. Well, there is a certain amount of validity to that, and in some senses you are sacrificing one kind of validity at the expense of another. Because there are plenty of people there are a lot of people who are older, who have some degree of cognitive decline, who when faced with a novel challenge like serial 7's, decompensate cognitively and perform far worse than they're actually capable of doing in their home environments, surrounded by the things that are familiar. Any gerontologist knows that you put an older patient in a hospital who's otherwise cognitively intact, put them in the bright lights and crazy sounds and busyness of a hospital, and they experience a delirious episode, and they fall apart cognitively. So the fact that these tests have this objectivity associated with them doesn't change the fact that they're fundamentally not giving you the information that you most badly need, which is that what is someone able to do at home? And shouldn't we judge someone's capacity to live independently on that, as opposed to what they do when posed with a novel and peculiar task in a laboratory setting? And I think in terms of cognitive function, this is particularly important because the dice of cognitive testing are weighted against older people who are cognitively frail, but yet perfectly capable of living high-quality lives in their home settings. So we are misclassifying people as cognitively impaired simply as an artifact of the way we test them. And that's a problem I'd like to fix. And that's a generalized way of saying the whole, sort of wrapping the whole thing up in a nutshell. I'm more interested in what someone does at home. I'm interested in the overachievers, those who say they have difficulty, who now count among the ranks of the disabled, but who are nonetheless actually cleaning their homes and feeding themselves and their family and doing all these things. I want to know what makes them different, and I want to design systems that optimize our ability for people to actually function in the home setting. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. I'm looking for a way to measure and assess what the do in a way that doesn't require, I know, it's very awkward. It's very awkward. So, yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm asking so many questions. There are a number of diseases, or I should say conditions, you had this whole taxonomy before, that are often diagnosed by asking people to speak, or can be diagnosed this way. And not only aphasias, but also diseases like Alzheimer's or motor diseases, which retrieval errors, planning problems, which can manifest in linguistic behavior. Do you think that it's necessary to use naturalistic data in order to diagnose those, or is a conversation in the doctor's office sufficient?
Well, a conversation in a doctor's office is a great theater to imagine developing. In other words, I've been talking about naturalistic settings and so forth, and I think that there's a tremendous amount to be learned there. But with regard to cognitive function, I would much rather have an ASR model specifically designed to understand doctor-patient speech communication as a way of identifying. You could program a software system, an automatic speech recognition system, to look at doctor-patient discourse and to identify changes in behavior, in cognition, in affect, in symptoms, etc., that could become a kind of clinical canary in the mine, if you will. I would much rather see that kind of application than what happens now, which is that an older patient, 70 years old, comes in and says, "Doctor, I can't remember, the names of my kids, and I'm really worried about my memory." Well, what happens now is that person then, the doctor says, "Well, I don't know how to do anything about that. Maybe you have Alzheimer's, maybe you have vascular dementia, so I can check your heart, but I'm going to send you to a neuropsychologist who's going to do 6 hours of testing on you and come back with an evaluation based on a whole range of these cognitive domain-specific and peculiar, weird tasks." Now that information, we can argue about the clinical utility of that from the standpoint of predicting who gets, who develops frank Alzheimer's, and that's not a debate we should have now. But for my money, that 6 hours of cognitive testing, which is utilized on a very small percentage of the population, has not demonstrated its usefulness. And I would much rather have a more general approach of trying to analyze language patterns in the doctor's office on a routine basis as a part of general
So you're planning that's
medical
already
care.
more naturalistic
Yeah.
than what's done now. You don't have to get language samples from the home.
Right.
Just using language samples at all is a naturalistic approach.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would consider that sort of is kind of a special case of a natural setting that has a lot of advantages over the kind of standardized testing thing that is so ingrained and paradigmatic at this point.
Another nice thing is it's controlled over a series of it's a controlled environment over a series of periodic appointments. So you could analyze changes that the doctor might not be able to perceive because the appointments are separated out on the list.
Right. The other thing you have to think of, I'm kind of a Wittgensteinian when it comes to language. Language, language is what we use to behave. And so, if I want to know whether someone's is cognitively intact, I want to evoke. I want to be assessing what is produced linguistically, spontaneously. I want to know. I don't want to know just what can be responded to in this sort of Skinnerian framework of operant behavior. I want to know, under conditions of ambiguity and social uncertainty, how does a person interact? What do they spontaneously produce? And that's a whole domain of information that's completely lost in our traditional approach, where we're taking the spontaneity of speech production out of the hands of the respondent, and we're saying, tell us the number of animals that you can think of in the next 30 seconds. Anybody want the last word? I've sort of left this slide here for you to peruse. These are potential, the law of the hammer. We talked about this, give a boy a hammer and everything becomes a nail. Well, the idea, this is my sort of imagination about all the different things that are measured and of interest beyond what I've mentioned in public health, where measuring language and speech, that's probably sloppy, could have potential value.
Okay, well.
Thank you.